In 1870 in Berlin, a society met in halls lit by oil lamps and fire grates, where ledgers claimed meals, but the paper itself remembered only ash. The register says bread, meat, wine. The fibers, under raking light, carry something else, crystalline. Dust embedded not on the surface but inside the pulp, as though the page itself had swallowed fire. The paradox is cruel in its neatness. A society that calls itself a table, but eats only what the fireplace keeps. A ledger that records banquets but gives up smoke when tested. Members who appear on rosters of attendance but vanish when asked for testimony. A club that consumed nothing but residue and left nothing but residue to prove it. We are taught to believe that eating binds a group, that sharing food makes presence real. But here the food itself is erased, replaced by ash, as if the society trained its paper to carry only what could not nourish. The register was satisfied. The hearth was not. Folklore knew these figures before Berlin gave them rooms. Villagers once told of brotherhoods that ate the smoke of their own chimneys, believing it made them weightless, harder to catch, harder to kill. They told of families who dined on soot to prove they no longer needed the harvest, who left their fields untilled and their tables bare. Ash was proof of endurance, ash was proof of refusal. In every telling, those who ate only residue became shadows themselves, walking among neighbors but no longer of them. And so the Berlin society is not a fiction but an echo. It writes itself as if folklore were its own bookkeeping. Each member entered by name, each supper marked with dishes that never appear in the room, each margin whispering the same refrain, still processing. Processing what? Meals that did not exist? Rituals that pretended to be dinners but were nothing more than fire rehearsals? We will follow the records. We will follow the fibers. We will follow the soot that insists it was swallowed. But we will not rush. These files are not short stories. They unfold the way ash does when disturbed, lifting slow into the air, drifting, settling again in corners you did not expect. Tonight we open the drawer, sit with the paper, and watch a society feed itself with absence. You are welcome to stay, to rest in the quiet of this archive, where time bends more slowly and the fire never quite goes out. The ledger will open at its pace, not ours. The residue will speak when we hold it to the light. Subscribe if you haven't yet. These files are long, and you'll need company along the way. And if you're listening now, tell me your country and the time. There is comfort in knowing we are not the only ones sitting before this fire that refuses to die, reading a ledger that refuses to forget its ash. The paradox hurts because it is simple. Meals written, ash preserved. Presence affirmed, nourishment denied. A society that gathered but never ate. A file that refuses to close. The building did not want attention. Berlin in 1870 was already filled with societies, for reading, for politics, for trade, for music, each proud enough to leave their names above doors and their coats of arms stamped in pamphlets. This one preferred shadow. It rented the upper floor of a narrow house in a street that smelled of coal and cabbage, and it marked its threshold with only one word, Tischgesellschaft, table society. The letters were hand-cut, black paint already flaking, but close inspection gives away more. Just beneath the carved placard at eye level, only if you stooped, someone had scratched a second word with a penknife. Ashy, ash. The hand is clumsy, the cut shallow, but the meaning precise. Not a motto, not ornament. A confession left in wood where only the patient would notice. Inside, the hall narrows into itself. The ceiling is low, rafters press down like ribs. Curtains shut out the street. No chandelier, only oil lamps, their glass chimneys clouded from years of soot. The floor creaks as though every step presses not just boards but memory. At the center waits the table. Pine, its surface scarred by knives, its edges rounded by years of leaning. Around it, chairs sagging in their joints, each with one leg shorter than the others, each wedged with folded paper scraps to keep balance. This is no banquet chamber. This is a room arranged for endurance, not spectacle. The desk at the far wall holds what matters most, the ledger. Its cover is cracked, leather splitting along the spine, corners rounded into softness by hands that turned it too often. Along the desk edge runs a groove, shallow but exact, where wrists have rested for decades. When we place our own hand there, it fits too neatly, as though the desk has been waiting. The air is its own archivist. It does not carry the warmth of food. It carries the dryness of fuel, charcoal, resin, a faint sweetness of wood smoke that refuses to leave even after years of empty hearths. Soot has no schedule. It lingers in cloth, in curtains, in paper. It seeps into pulp until the fiber itself darkens. The ledger pages exhale that scent as soon as we lift the cover. Not flour, not grease, but ash. The walls keep their testimony. One corner blackened darker than the rest where the fire grate once flared too high. Another bears handprints, grey smudges pressed at shoulder height, as if someone steadied themselves after lifting what the fire left behind. The boards at the base release dust when disturbed, puffs that glitter in lamplight like breath caught in air. We slow down to count. On the desk, an iron lamp, wick trimmed, its reservoir half full of oil that smells faintly rancid. A pewter dish, dulled to matte, its rim edged with grey. A stack of cards stamped gespaced, dined, though no record says they were ever distributed. A drawer half filled with fine black powder, collected, perhaps even curated, like a resource rather than a nuisance. The ledger itself insists on its duality. Written entries in a clear clerk's hand, bread, meat, wine, vegetables, names of members in attendance, tallies as steady as any club or parish record. But when tilted under raking light, the surface betrays another truth. Fibers glinting with crystals, not flour dust, but ash embedded within, not residue on top, inclusion inside. The page itself ate what the men pretended to consume. This is the locus, the place where paradox resides not as rumor, but as object. The room testifies even when the records deny. Folklore has always held ash close. In villages outside Berlin, women scattered it in doorways to bar spirits from entering. Men rubbed it into wounds to dry blood. Children were warned not to play in it, lest it record their steps and bring them back in dreams. Ash was memory without body, residue that persisted when everything else had burned. To eat it, stories said, was to swallow memory itself, to bind oneself to what could not be erased. To eat it together was to form a bond that no witness could untie, and so the society's choice becomes clearer. Food written, ash preserved. A paradox made liturgical. They turned eating into ritual and ritual into residue. On the wall near the desk hangs a slip of paper pinned with a brass tack. A single word stamped in red, Verarbeitung processing. Beneath it, smaller in graphite notch, still processing. The phrase does not belong in a dining ledger. It belongs in a factory report or a bureaucrat's office. Its presence here is absurd and therefore exact. The society, like the file, was still processing. Processing what? Ash into nourishment, ritual into doctrine, or memory into ledger, until even the soot could be filed. We pause because stillness is part of the method. This is not silence, which is emptiness. This is stillness, which is presence held taut. The lamp flickers, the desk groove accepts our wrist, the ledger waits to be turned, the placard outside promised a table. The locus inside delivers only ash. Folio 1 of the ledger begins with confidence. The hand is practiced, the ink sits even, the ruling lines are obeyed. A date in the left margin, 3 March 1870. A heading centered in a neat, modest script, Supper. Beneath it, the columns we expect, Speise, dish, Getränk, drink, Anwesend, present, Bemerkung, remarks. It looks like any Berlin club's bookkeeping, orderly, civic, carbon calm. The meal list behaves at first. Brot, Rind, Wurzelgemüse, Rotwein, bread, beef, roots, red wine. Attendance total at the right edge, 12. Beneath, a signature, Schriftführer. Recording secretary, the flourish tucked, unshowy. Paper that knows its job, ink that knows its lane, and then the first small refusal. The ink is honest until it isn't. In the line Brot, the T-stroke is heavier than the letters before it, as if weight was added after the fact. Under raking light, the final stroke shines more than it should. Fresh ink over older ink is brighter, oil still sleeping in the black. A dish retouched, not written. A word pressed twice to turn absence into memory. The count tallies until it doesn't. The total 12 is crisp, but beneath it, invisible until the lamp lifts, there is a dent of 11. The pen decided 11. The paper remembers 11. The ink insists 12. What entered the room? Guests or corrections? Thurikas, the hand belongs and does not belong. The signature Schriftführer matches the day's neat entries until the F. The loop on that letter is wider than the rest of the hand's habits. Compare to the month title above. The same scribe keeps A. His loops narrow. Here the flourish is foreign, as though a second hand guided the last letter to mimic presence. The remarks column remarks on nothing. It carries only a mark, a small diagonal slash that repeats 3 lines down. In other folios, the clerk writes words there: good attendance, late start, guests. On folio 1, the mark is not language, it is procedure. The same mark appears in factory books when product passes inspection without inspection. A sign for do not ask. 5. The wine is present, but the glass is clean. In kitchen books, grease and tannin leave halos, edged shadows on paper where a cup visited too close. This page is dry. No ring, no print, no accident of liquid. A supper whose liquids avoided gravity. 6. The hearth tells on the menu. The Feuerbuch, a small firebook kept beside the grate, logs ash removal after supper, Asche On the same date, 3 März, the firebook's hand writes, ash collected, bowl full, grate cleared. If beef and roots were eaten, how does ash occur here, logged not as waste but as product? The page eats what the men pretend to. A cotton swab passed across the blank margin rescues nothing, no grease, no flour. But tilt the line rind under. Raking light and the fibers sparkle. Micro-grit seated in pulp. Not on in. These particles migrate inward only when air carried them long enough to be inhaled by paper, the way lungs accept smoke. A delivery without a kitchen. A receipt pinned behind folio 1 shows Holzkohle 30 Pfund, 30 pounds of charcoal delivered that morning. There is no corresponding market stub for beef or roots. Fire has a paper trail, food does not. The ledger lists plates, the city records fuel. The prayer slips intrude. Tucked between folio 1 and 2, a narrow card stamped G-spaced, dined, remains unused, edges still sharp. On its reverse in graphite faint enough to be a thought, noch verarbeiten, still processing, a dining token that confesses delay. Tet. The attendance grid knows a month it cannot have. In the back of the ledger, the monthly attendance chart for March shows 31 marks. March 1870 had 31 days, but the first supper is dated the 3rd. 2 checks precede the first date. Presence before beginning. A note that does not belong. In the left gutter, where the binder's thread holds, there is a faint pencil notation, Rezepte, recipes, and then nothing. The line ends midword, graphite fades, the nib lifted. If there were recipes, they were never allowed their nouns. The firebook contradicts the flesh. On the same leaf, in the firebook's compact hand, a triangle marks Aschenbecher, ash bowl, zur Tafel, to the table. The triangle is the symbol that appears again in later pages beside bread and beef. A triangle travels from grate to menu like a small quiet confession. Fire was served. Folio 1 wants to be ordinary. It lists what any club lists. But contradiction doesn't shout, it repeats. A touched stroke, a buried number, a borrowed loop, a remark that is not a remark, each too small to warrant complaint alone, together enough to breed refrain. The refrain has a place already, that stamped slip, Verarbeitung, noch, processing still. We make the inventory the way a cautious clerk does when a supervisor leans near. Present what is requested, place what is dangerous in the margins, allow the margins to be read by those who know where to look. We pull the Feuerbuch forward. Its cover is soot-soft, leather dulled to charcoal. Inside, the entries are terse. Date, hour, grate cleared, ash transferred, bowl replaced. On 3 März, the line contains an anomaly, Schüssel and Tisch, bowl to table. The word tish returns in this book only on meeting nights. The hearth met the table. The ledger denies it. The fire book writes it without shame. We return to the meal list. Wurzelgemüse, root vegetables, ends with a tiny diagonal interruption just before the umlaut, as if the nib glanced off grit. The particle that deflected it is still seated in the page. Under a fine brush, the dot skitters. The line does not lift. There is no kitchen in this room. The grit is not salt. It is what remains when everything else is gone. We count faces because the ledger counts bodies. 12 names in a column on folio 1. Brandt, C. Fischer, Lewin, Heine, M. The scribe uses only an initial. Rosen, Hartmann, Klee, Vogel, B. A. L. Schultz. Of these 12, 3 do not reappear as mouths in any deposition, only as initials in fees. The ledger prefers consonants to testimony. We check the fee line. A neat Beiträge, dues, notes 12 mark collected, 1 per man. The coins leave no rings, no thumbprint. In ledgers of beer halls, the dues line darkens in circles from wet hands. Here the paper is clean. Money arrived without sweat. We allow one memory from the city itself to bleed in. In 1870, Berlin, societies that ate together registered menus to escape excise. The police required kitchens to be named. The guild required grain to be accounted. The taxman required wine to be declared. The registry holds a blank where this society should sit. The police categorized it as a Lesegesellschaft, a reading society. The ledger insists tisch, table. The firebook insists ash, ash. Categories making a braid of denial. We separate the contradictions so each has its breath. Smudged signature loop. A second hand finishes what the first cannot own. Hidden count beneath the ink. 11 pressed, 12 displayed. Number as costume. Remark that is a mark, not a word. Inspection passed without inspection. Delivery for fire with no market for food. The city bills fuel, hunger bills itself. Particles in the fiber, not on the page. The book eats what men pretend to. Triangle migrating from fire to menu. Symbol learns to walk. Attendance that begins before beginning. Presence, promise to itself. Recipe started and abandoned. Language refuses to name what ritual will not allow. Each paragraph a straw, together a bale. The weight speaks. We open folio 2 to see if the pattern breaks. It doesn't. New date 17. Marz, new list, brot, fish, vine. The dent beneath total 10 reads 9. The same triangle seeds itself beside brot. The same remarks column receives the same slash as if a clerk were told what to do with his hand when the mouth will not move. We press the book's gutter against a soft light and watch the fiber show its discipline. Along the fold, grey deepens where ash has collected most. Pages breathe like lungs when flexed. Inhale ash, exhale certainty. Folklore intrudes because numbers are never safe in tales. In stories told in alleys off Oranienstrasse, men boasted of societies that ate their own cinders to prove they owed nothing to harvest or heaven. They spoke of vows taken with mouths closed, lips in prayer, tongues ash-streaked, throats dry, because hunger makes truth easier to keep. They laughed about accounts that listed stews made only of air, wine made only of the red in a man's cheek. They told with pleasure of ledgers that learned the trick and began to write dinners that no kitchen had ever met. Numbers in such tales adjust themselves. 12 becomes 12 because 12 is the right number for a table, not because 12 men sat. Names become initials because initials can't be subpoenaed by a conscience. In the oldest of those stories, a child counts guests around a winter hearth and always arrives at one more than the chairs allow. It is the ash-eater, the grandmother says. He sits between insistence and breath. The child learns to stop counting aloud. The number remains. Record-keeping becomes an act of mercy. You write what the room wants to be true. Folio 1 ends where we began, with confidence that does not deserve itself. The page presents a supper. The firebook presents an ash bowl. The city presents a charcoal bill. The fiber presents crystals in its own body. The contradictions are not errors, they are the method. The ledger learned to be a mask in the first line, it wrote. We close the leaf without closing it. The margin breathes. The desk groove warms our wrist. Somewhere in the stack, a red stamp waits to be used again. Verarbeitung, still processing. Meals that didn't happen. Fuel that did. A society that fed itself with what remains when truth has been burned to its outline. One book is never enough to convict a ritual. The ledger can lie politely. The room can echo. The firebook can confess in shorthand. A second record, separate hand, separate purpose, must agree before a paradox becomes a method. Berlin provided one, then another. The first confirming volume is not a society book at all, but a Sanitätspolizei docket, Public Health Police, Spring Quarter 1870, docket leaf Ivor 23. The inspector came, he says, on complaint of smoke, expecting a kitchen that cheated the tax. He found no hearth for cooking, only a grate for fuel. His list is unsentimental. No pan hooks, no pot soot, no lard keg, no flour bin. Then the sentence that authorities love because it absolves them while preserving the file. In Bearbeitung, in processing. Not a fine, not a closure. Delay as verdict. Pinned to that docket is a small cloth slip, ash-stained at the edge, stitched with a number 12. The inspector's note explains without meaning to, grate furnished with 12 bowls. Bowls show residue only. 12 bowls, residue only. The ledger's 12 reappears in ceramic. Dinnerware that never met food. The docket is not there to dramatize, it is there to account for disease. Yet it writes the society with more honesty than the society writes itself. The second confirming document speaks softer and cuts deeper. A physician's casebook, leather darkened like the soot that lived in its owner's cuffs. Dr. K has neat columns of symptoms and fees. On a page dated 10, März 1870, he lists gastric weakness for C. Brant and persistent cough for AL. Under each he notes the tongue dry, grayed, and teeth dark without decay. The diagnoses are cautious, but the margin is not. The margin carries the line no clerk would write into a ledger. Nicht Speise, nur Rückstand. Not food, only residue. The sentence stands alone, unbilled, as if he were writing a note to himself he both wanted and did not want remembered. We press the casebook under gentle light. The ink shines the way iron gall should, when it is new to a page. The hand is calm, not theatrical. He means what he writes, not food, only residue. A third confirming sheet lives in an apothecary's account from Friedrichstrasse, a ledger that measures purchases in honest coin. Across March and April, it lists Tierkohle pulverisiert, powdered animal charcoal, purchased in quantities that would medicate a ward, not a club. There is no matching order for flour, for salt, for wine, only powders that whiten sugar and quiet stomachs. In the apothecary's column of uses, a clerk has helpfully penciled a single word beside the largest. Order Bindemittel, Binder. The society bought what binds and blots. When aligned on the desk, docket, casebook, apothecary, the three records do not echo, they harmonize. The Sanitätspolizei dockets the absence of kitchen. The physician writes not food, only residue. The apothecary sells powders that make residue survivable. The first ledger's menu looks, in their company, like a mask the room no longer agrees to wear. We turn back to the society ledger's folio 2 for the old reflex. Perhaps the first page was anomaly. It is not. The same hand, the same titles, the same calm parade of dishes that were not there. Fish is written with a firmness that contradicts the room. At its right edge, a faint triangle returns, the firebook sign for ash bowl to table. The remarks column again refuses language. The diagonal slash appears obedient. The attendance total glows 10, and beneath it the dent remembers 9. The city did not attend, the ledger did. What looked like clerical fatigue in record number 1 begins to look like policy in record number 2. And policy, once named, reproduces. The Sanitätspolizei docket reappears a week later with the same stamp, in Bearbeitung, and a new line. Fenster verhangen, windows veiled. The inspector writes that no food odors were present. He adds almost helplessly, dust in papers. The doctor's casebook gains a patient from outside the roster. Heine, noted for night coughing. The margin beside the name carries no fee, only that same sentence again, abbreviated and harder. Nur Rückstand, only residue, the E. A apothecary ledger follows with a purchase of Abish marshmallow root, soothing to throats. No barley, no butter. A neighbour's deposition enters the stack like weather, not law. Frau S., on the floor below, called in to answer about smoke that stains her linens. She writes tidy and defensive. They carry bowls from the grate to their table. They cough black. They refuse my bread. She underlines refuse as if she cannot bear the insult to the idea of supper. The deposition is filed to the docket and stamped with the same ritual in Bearbeitung, because delay lights every page in this case like a low flame. We test the pattern, not with reagent that will come, but with tempo. Does the delay serve a purpose? The city's accounting often explains what reports and ledgers won't. A finance clerk's memo, stapled where it doesn't belong, lists excise exemptions granted to a dozen Lesegesellschaften, reading societies, registered that quarter. The Ash Society appears among them, misnamed as readers. Reading societies are exempt from kitchen scrutiny. A table society would be inspected. The misclassification is not an error. It is the price of being left alone, and here the refrain mutates. The red stamp Verarbeitung, processing, shows up at the bottom of the ledger's month summary, but the police docket prefers another euphemism, unerledigt, unfinished. The apothecary uses none. He simply writes bezahlt, paid. The physician uses the only sentence that feels like an oath, not food, only residue. Together they speak like an incantation learned by different priests. Processing, unfinished, paid, only residue. Not aligned with one another, and therefore precisely aligned with the system that profits from their disalignment. We allow folklore to touch the page because Berlin, too, kept rituals that looked like ash. Aschermittwoch, the day after Carnival, when the faithful wore grey on their foreheads and remembered dust as destiny. In taverns, some men smeared ash on beer to mock the rite. In kitchens, some women rubbed it into pans to sweeten pastry. In secret societies, so rumour said, men took ash on the tongue to prove solidarity against the police. Ash pretended to be repentance and became immunity. If you could consume what remained of fire, you owed nothing to the field. If your ledger consumed it, you owed nothing to the law. The physician's line sits at the centre of this. Not food, only residue. It is diagnosis, yes. It is also taxonomy. It assigns the society a class outside the city's categories. Food can be counted, taxed, inspected, banned. Residue cannot. Residue is after. Residue is what is left when the city has no instruments to measure what was done. The line frees the authorities from acting even as it proves the act. We examine the physician's hand for more than content, for reluctance, for courage. The words are small, not grand. Their pressure is even. There is no angry underline. He is not shouting at the men. He is recording a decision that medicine cannot wrap. Not food. He will not dignify it with that noun. Only residue. He will not elevate it to poison. Between those refusals lives the society's method. Eat what cannot be named and law cannot follow. A small parish slip falls from the docket when we lift it again. A card recycled by the society to wedge a chair. Its front carries a printed prayer for the sick. Its back carries a pencil tally 1 to 111 stacked into 4. The fifth mark never arrives. Presents promised, presents withheld, presents scratched only as far as the hand can bear. The chair sits level because the card stubbornly refuses a fifth stroke. We do not grant this meaning beyond itself. We also do not dismiss it. In the city registry, a clerk adds a note to the society's entry, ohne Deckung, without cover. He means the charitable backing every proper association must show, a guild, a church, a patron. But the phrase reads, like a verdict on the table too, without cover, without dish, without coat of sauce. The clerk declines to assign a sponsor. He files the problem on a line that floats above responsibility. Here the refrain takes another shape, nicht zugeordnet, not assigned, appears on a relief petition for a porter who claims the society worsened his cough. The petition returns with that pencil sentence at top, not assigned. To whom? Not said. By whom erased? Record number 2, then, does not contradict record number 1. It confirms and clarifies. What looked like a supper abnormality becomes a city habit. The police docket discovers bowls that never held food. The physician's casebook names ash, where a diagnosis should have rescued appetite. The apothecary sells binding powders by the pound while flour never crosses the threshold of the page. A neighbor describes the procession from grate to table. A parish card steadies a chair, and steadies our sense that materials in this file are tired of lying. And because the template demands the refrain move, we let it move in the mouth the city prefers, in Bearbeitung, still processing, to delay. Action until the season changes, unerledigt, unfinished, to suggest attention without remedy, nicht zugeordnet, not assigned, to refuse responsibility, ohne Deckung, without cover, to admit exposure but deny aid. 4 phrases that never say ash and never need to. Together they build the only sentence the system trusts. If it cannot be assigned, it cannot be accused. The society understood. It wrote food and ate residue, then trained the city to repeat the sentence that made both possible. We close the high. Docket and the casebook, not fully. The desk groove reminds our wrist where to rest. The room keeps the last word anyway. Ash rises when we move, then settles back as if remembering the bowls. The file does not ask for belief. It asks for the next beat, where chemistry, not language, will speak. For now, the physician's margin remains the truest line written in Berlin that month. Not food, only residue. And the refrain, obedient to its own logic, mutates once more at the foot of the page in a clerk's careful block. Nicht abgeglichen, not aligned. The books do not match, which is to say they do, forensics are supposed to reassure. Chemistry is the clerk that cannot lie, the reagent the eye that does not blink. In these cases, the lab enters like weather, expected to be predictable, discovered, to be its own season. The Berlin ledger was meant to confirm iron gall ink and nothing more. Instead, it produced a climate no inspector had instruments for. The reagent arrives clear in its vial. A cotton tip touched to the margin is supposed. To brown, proof of iron salts aged into black, it does not. On the word brought, the swab dampens the fiber and something else happens. A pale glimmer, crystalline, forms inside the pulp. Not on top, not smearing outward, but inside. The particle refracts like frost in candlelight. Ash, not ink, showing. Itself where no powder should have traveled. The technician's note is sparse. Nicht Eisen, Rückstand im Faserinnern. Not iron, residue in the fiber core. He does not embellish. He does not circle the phrase. He writes it once with the pressure of someone recording a weather change. What should have been a chemical reaction becomes a mineral apparition. Paper that reveals not writing, but what was carried into its lungs. We try another entry. Rind beef. The reagent spreads halo blue before retreating into a dull red. The blue is faint as morning sky. The red is the rust of a hearth. The two shades do not blend. They stack, one after the other, like time-lapse, of dusk on a page that cannot own a day. The fiber cycles itself. Inhale blue, exhale red, return to black. The ink does not age. It rehearses. The clerk files the observation with words that betray his confusion. Bild unverändert. Image unchanged. It is the phrase used when photographs resist decay, when negatives darken and then return, when a bruise on paper fades but refuses to stay gone. Unchanged is the file's favorite euphemism for the impossible. It refuses to say the word anomaly. It prefers to believe nothing happened. The technician watches crystals bloom in fibers and still records unchanged. Under ultraviolet, the anomaly grows theatrical. Margins that looked clean under lamps swell into constellations of pale grit, as though the page were seeded with stars. A swipe of the swab darkens them, then they shine again. The cycle repeats, like embers stirred, refusing to die. Under raking light, the dents of false numbers glow more brightly than ink itself. filled with specks the reagent cannot explain. Chemistry, confronted with ritual, behaves like weather, predictable only in its refusal to be controlled. The firebook is subjected to the same test. Its entries, terse and practical, are inked with the same gall. Yet where it marks Schüssel and Tisch, bowl to table, the reagent flares brighter, filling the loop of the S with glitter, as though the letter itself contained a coal. Other words remain inert. Only the transfer from grate to table burns in the fibre, as if the page could not help but keep its ember alive. We record the notes as the template requires. Expected, iron gall browning, stable. Observed, blue halo, red bloom, return. To black, expected, surface stain only. Observed, crystals embedded in fibre core. Expected, stable under UV. Observed, emission of particulate glimmer, repeating. Clark's line, Bild unverändert, image unchanged. Margin. Remark nicht Eisen, nur Rückstand. Not iron, only residue. The refrain mutates accordingly. From in Bearbeitung, still processing, we arrive now at Bild unverändert, image unchanged. Both mean the same thing. The file refuses to admit change, even when it has seen it. Delay and denial are twins. Folklore had a name for this too. Berlin's soot-eaters, children sent into chimneys, were said to cough black flecks onto their pillows that arranged themselves into runes. Mothers burned the sheets before anyone could read them. The story taught that ash could write itself, that residue was not passive, that soot was not waste, but witness. The reagent here performs the same parable. It touches ink and the page. Exhales memory in crystal form, not writing added but residue revealed. Another story merchants told of a powder called Totenasche, death ash, sold in alleys. They said if you sprinkled it on a page, whatever was spoken in that room would appear faintly in the margins the next morning. Clerks tested it with prayers, with confessions, with nonsense, and found lines half-formed, never whole, as if the fibre could overhear but not understand. Children whispered into fireplaces, hoping their words would survive in soot. The Berlin society may not have believed these tales, but their books behave as though they did. Ash writes, even when no pen agrees. The apothecary's ledgers confirm. The forensic result without comment. Orders of animal charcoal arrive in sacks, not ounces. Their notes use the word Bindemittel, binder, not medicine. Charcoal is meant to fix sugar, to whiten wine, to quiet stomachs. But it also fixes in paper. The fibres in the society ledger drank it as lungs do. The reagent only reveals what the page already absorbed. We sit with the test long enough to feel the room adjust. The desk groove warms under the weight of our wrist. The lamp flickers as if feeding on the page's small performance. The air tastes faintly metallic, like smoke too long bottled. Forensics should close debate. Here it opens a deeper fold. The ledger wrote meals. The reagent writes residue. Both remain, contradicting and confirming in the same breath. The refrain is everywhere now. In Bearbeitung, unerledigt, nicht zugeordnet, Bild unverändert. Still, processing, unfinished, not assigned, image unchanged. 4 sentences the system prefers because each one means nothing to act on, yet each one carries the trace of an act that refused to vanish. Bureaucracy behaves like weather too, repeating, shifting, delaying, never concluding. Rituals thrive in that climate. Ash becomes meal because the page insists it is neither erased nor explained, only still present. We file the forensic notes alongside the ledger. They do not resolve, they refract. Chemistry does not name what was eaten. It names what was carried. Crystals inside pulp, blue into red, unchanged image. The society's truth is not that it wrote meals, it is that it trained its pages to eat ash for them. We leave the jar sealed, the cotton tips darkening in their tray. The archive breathes again, dust rising, dust settling. Forensics has not closed the case. It has only shifted our refrain once. More not aligned. The ink is not aligned with chemistry. The paper is not aligned with diet. The residue is not aligned with categories. The file continues, still processing, Image unchanged, not aligned. Patterns don't begin, they accumulate. A single stamp on a ledger looks like caution. The same stamp reappearing across dockets, slips and chits starts to sound like a song the city hums to itself, so it can sleep. The first surface is modest, a return slip pinned to the inside cover of the society ledger, thin paper, edge singed, where it brushed the lamp. In red block it reads Verarbeitung, processing. Beneath, in smaller graphite, a clerk has added noch. Still processing. No date, no initials. The slip exists to hold time in place without admitting why time is being held. We set it down and reach for the next, a Sanitätspolizei memo. From April carries the same refusal in a different dialect, unerledigt, unfinished. The word sits where outcomes are supposed to sit. There is a blank after it, generous and clean, the space where a remedy would be named. The inspector has filled nothing. He has performed the act of writing without the act of deciding. Unfinished is how a city learns to remain comfortable with what it knows. The census margin learns the refrain in its own hand, beside the misclassified. Entry, Lesegesellschaft. Someone has pressed a slanted second line in softer graphite. Nicht abgleichen. Do not reconcile. Not a fact, an instruction. The enumerator is telling his future self what not to attempt. Do not make these books match. If you force alignment, responsibility follows. If you keep them apart, delay becomes policy. An apothecary ledger adopts the chant without meaning to. Its columns are honest. Quantities, prices, receipts. Beside the largest order of powdered charcoal, a shop hand writes bezahlt, paid, and... Then, perhaps irritated by rumor, pencils build unverendered, image unchanged in the margin where comments don't belong. He has seen powders whiten sugar and clarify wine. He has not seen them feed a room. He resolves the contradiction by borrowing the city's favorite sentence, nothing to see. The page writes otherwise. The fire brigade report for the district includes an aside after a call that never became a fire. Fenster verhangen, geruchfehlt. Windows veiled, odor absent. The captain closes with aufschiebend, deferred. Fire deferred is not a thing. You put it out or you do not. But once the city learns a refrain, it applies it to everything. Deferred covers absence, delay and refusal, with one syllable that sounds like prudence. A parish envelope arrives in the pile by mistake, repurposed as a wedge under a short chair leg. On its face, a printed prayer. On its back, the tidy hand from... Earlier slips a new line into the liturgy of denial. Nicht zugeordnet, not assigned. It is written where a name would be addressed. Not assigned to whom? God, parish, sponsor. The word saves ink by refusing to save anyone. Even the post learns the tune. A delivery notice for a sack of coal is stamped zugestellt, delivered, and then in violet ink, crossed by ohne Deckung, without cover. The phrase has a fiscal meaning, no guarantor, and a literal one. Without lid, without dish, without cover on the table. The city speaks in double exposures when it wants to be seen, doing something while doing nothing. The coal arrives covered by paper and uncovered by policy. We array these surfaces along the desk like a scale the room hums through. Verarbeitung, noch, still processing. Unerledigt, unfinished. Nicht abgleichen, do not reconcile. Bild unverändert. Image unchanged, aufschiebend, das deferred, nicht zugeordnet, not assigned. Ohne Deckung, without cover. None of these says ash, none says meal. All of them say wait. And waiting repeated becomes policy. We test whether there is order in the repetition or whether we are only hearing echoes because we want a song. Dates help. 3. März, first ledger supper, comes with the red Verarbeitung slip. 10. März, the physician's casebook, carries the margin nicht Speise nur Rückstand, not food, only residue. 17. März, second ledger supper, draws unerledigten the health docket. 24. März, apothecary purchase, collects bezahlt and the irritated Bild unverändert. 13. März, census night, acquires nicht abgleichen beside the misclassification. 2. April, fire brigade visit, ends aufschiebend. 7. April, relief petition, returns nicht zugeordnet. The order is not random, it is procedural. Education, of the file, then discipline, then finance, then enumeration, then safety, then charity. Each office learns the same three-syllable lullaby and sings its verse. Bureaucracy does not know it is praying. It calls these stamps and memos workflow, but anyone who has listened to Mother's Hush a Colicky House recognizes the pattern. Say it until it is. Hush now, hush now, hush now. The city version of the lullaby is colder. Processing, unfinished, not assigned. The effect is the same. The room stops demanding a decision because the language has given it the comfort of sequence. Folklore had a parallel. In tenement stairwells, women traded charms. To quiet a fireplace that smoked. Sprinkle salt in a triangle, they said. Speak the fire's name 3 times in a whisper. Touch the grate with ash and say blib, stay. They did not believe the words had power. They believed repetition told the room what it was supposed to do. The stamps in these files behave the same way. Verarbeitung tells the ledger to keep breathing. Analytic tells the docket to stay open. Nicht zugeordnet tells responsibility to look elsewhere. Bild unverändert tells the eye to agree it saw nothing change. We notice the order of hands as much as the order of words. Neat block prints the first line. Hurried cursive adds the second. A heavy, confident script lands the third like a seal. Across slips and margins, the same trio performs their roles. Formal, apologetic, final. It is not necessarily 3 people. It is a taught choreography. The stamps enter in sequence like a ritual that requires a chorus. Even the materials obey the chant. Thin school paper hosts the kindlier phrases, still processing, as if softness suits the fiction that care is being taken. Medium ledger leaves accept the managerial, unfinished, not aligned, because commerce prefers neutrality. Heavy court stock receives the blunt, not assigned, because weight loves to pretend it is justice. The thicker the sheet, the less it needs verbs. We take one of the phrases and follow it as if it were a thread. Bild unverändert, image unchanged, was born in the lab, a camera's excuse. It migrates to the apothecary, to the police, to a parish hand that uses it to justify failing to visit a cough. By the time it arrives in the society ledger, it no longer means experiment. It means mercy. We did not see what you did, therefore, you did not do it. The pattern is not merely the city's. The society learns it and repeats it back. A month. Summary at the back of the ledger carries a 3-line chorus scribbled faintly in pencil. Tisch, verarbeitet. Table, processing. Speise, Bild unverändert. Meal, image unchanged. Mitgliedschaft, nicht zugeordnet. Membership, not assigned. Club describing itself as a sequence of refusals. Identity becomes what the stamp says is not yet true, has not been decided, does not belong anywhere. Ritual thrives where categories will not hold. We stand, stretch, and the chair wedges tremble. The parish card under the short leg slides, and, for a moment, the word nicht zugeordnet stares up from the floorboards like a confession the furniture has been forced to memorize. Even the room participates in the chant. Even the wood performs, not deciding. We catalogue the function of the pattern because patterns exist to do work. It creates time where action might have been demanded. It creates distance between record and responsibility. It creates quiet that can be measured as order. When the health office stamps unerledigt, a supervisor above can claim diligence without consequence. When the census margin orders do not reconcile, numbers remain polite, even when they lie. When the apothecary line adopts image unchanged, trade continues to sell binders to men who will not eat, and no one has to say why. The chant is a market. It buys silence and sells stability. We let one last slip choose the exit line for the beat. In the back of the firebook, a half-torn page shows a clerk practicing stamps the way a schoolchild practices letters. Verarbeitung. Unerledigt, nicht abgeglichen, nicht zugeordnet, Bild unverändert underneath. In small, almost embarrassed script, a sentence not meant for the record. Wenn es nicht passt, bleibt es. If it doesn't fit, it remains. That is the thesis of a pattern that calls itself process. Keep it. Not because it is true, but because it is comfortable. Keep it until comfort becomes fact. We close the stack without closing it. The groove welcomes the wrist that will return. The lamp steadies itself. Outside, a tram grinds by and leaves a smear of soot on the window's edge, adding its own line to the chorus. The pattern has finished introducing itself. In the next beat, the system that sings it will step into the light. Not a villain with a face, but a machine that survives on refrains. Silence in a single ledger could be dismissed as negligence. Silence echoed across firebooks, dockets, casebooks, apothecary accounts, census margins. This is not neglect. This is design. When a city repeats the same refusal in every office, what you are seeing is not anomaly, but system. Berlin, in 1870, had many societies. It had laws to classify them, guilds to register them, tax codes to track their consumption. But it also had an appetite of its own. It knew what it wanted to see in its ledgers, order. It knew what it wanted to hear from its citizens, quiet. The society that ate only ash provided both. The first mechanism is backlog optics. A city is judged not by truth but by tidiness. A police docket stamped unaledict, unfinished, appears diligent. The inspector visited, noted, postponed, no scandal, no closure, no mess. A census margin marked nicht abgleichen, do not reconcile, prevents. Totals from misaligning. The numbers flow forward smoothly. An apothecary ledger that shrugs bild unverendet, image unchanged, allows commerce to continue uninterrupted. In every instance, the refusal to decide is rewarded with the appearance of stability. Backlog looks like discipline. Delay looks like diligence. And so a society that should have been a scandal becomes a statistic. Its silence buys the city the comfort of symmetry. The second mechanism is donor tranquility. Berlin societies depended on patrons, wealthy families, guild elders, church boards, who wanted their name associated with civility, not scandal. A reading society is charming. A supper club is respectable. A brotherhood that eats only residue is neither. To keep patrons from alarm, the files are renamed, restamped, reassigned. The Ash Society becomes a Lesergesellschaft, a reading group. The ledger that lists dinners is treated as bookkeeping, not confession. Patrons continue their gifts because the city has assured them that nothing disruptive lurks behind those curtains. Quiet is good for fundraising. Residue is profitable as long as it is not spoken aloud. The language mutates to support these incentives. We watch the birth of bureaucratic neologisms, words invented not to describe, but to disguise. Quiet household, a phrase the census uses when members are present but unrecorded. Compatibility, a police word for practices that do not fit law but are not prosecuted. Dispensation deferred, a parish phrase that means permission has not been granted, but no punishment will be sought. These words are changelings. They replace what is known with what can be tolerated. They are designed to keep ash from being named ash, to keep refusal from being named refusal. The refrain itself becomes a tool, still processing, unfinished, not assigned. Image unchanged. These phrases do not describe, they perform. They buy time. They relieve pressure. They distribute responsibility upward until no one individual can be blamed. They are less like sentences and more like valves. Release the steam. Keep the machine intact. The society thrives because the machine requires precisely this kind of quiet irregularity to keep moving. We compare this to folklore, not because we need color, but because folklore understood the system before the archive admitted it. In tales, told outside Berlin, a child replaced by a changeling does not vanish. It remains, but altered, compliant, silent, feeding on things no human would call food. The parents are told, do not draw attention, do not speak of it. Pretend, continue. The family survives by collusion with the deception. The system is the changeling here. It eats the society and replaces it with paperwork that looks the same, but speaks only in refrains. The men continue to meet, to bring bowls from grate to table. The city continues to log their names. Both sides agree not to notice the substitution. We describe how categories mutate to fit. A relief petition returned, not assigned, is not evidence. of negligence, but proof the system knows how to preserve itself. A parish slip that omits a dispensation is not evidence of ignorance, but of intent. A census that counts bodies without reconciling them is not a mistake, but a protection. Each office edits reality just enough to prevent rupture. Each office benefits. The society is shielded from prosecution. The city is shielded from scandal. The patrons are shielded from shame. The refrain is the engine oil in this machine. Without it, the gears grind. With it, everything turns silently. A file draws a society. The society cannot redraw the file. The Berlin Ash Society did not invent its paradox. The city did. The society only learned how to inhabit it. We must say the thesis line plainly because the file will not. A file draws a society. The society cannot redraw the file. Once written as a reading club, it will never be prosecuted as an ash cult. Once logged as meals, it will never be admitted as soot. Once stamped processing, it will never be finished. The members could stand in the street eating ash in daylight, and the file would still call them readers. That is the violence of bureaucracy. It survives reality by redrawing it. So the villain here is not the men who carried bowls from grate to table. It is the apparatus that taught them how to be invisible. The system is not clumsy, it is hungry. It consumes anomaly and digests it into process. It keeps its donors tranquil, its numbers orderly, its ledgers symmetrical. It knows that scandal costs more than residue. It has learned that the cheapest meal is silence, and this is why the refrain keeps mutating. Each new office finds its own version. In Bearbeitung, unerledigt, nicht abgleichen, nicht zugeordnet, Bild unverändert. The words differ, the function is identical. They are the lullabies the system sings to itself. They do not name, they do not accuse, they do not end. They keep the machine alive. Folklore called ash what remained when fire forgot. The city called ash what remained when responsibility forgot. Both were right. Both knew that residue has its own appetite. Both warned that once you eat it, you cannot return to bread. We close this beat not with outrage, but with recognition. Systems do not confess. They do not apologize, they metabolize. They turn anomaly into paperwork, silence into stability, residue into policy. The Berlin Society survived not because it was secret, but because it was useful. It gave the city the gift every city desires, quiet records. This is not folklore. This is bureaucratic horror. Administrative patience, financial incentives, linguistic disguises, and a ledger that never closed. This is the macabre history of the society that ate only ashes. Closure is never conclusion. In these files, closure means residue, the evidence that refuses to accept silence, the marks that remain when every clerk has finished his line. Berlin's Ash Society does not end with prosecutions or punishments. It ends in the after-images left in its papers and furniture. Residue is the archive's way of telling us, not finished, not erased, still recorded. On the last folio of the ledger, the clerk has written the month summary. Attendance total 14, dues 14 mark, remarks blank. But under angled light, the fiber admits a rehearsal of words that were never meant to be read. Beneath the ink, pressed faintly, 3 terms are visible in sequence: gehalten, nicht gehalten, noch verzeichnet, kept, not kept, still recorded. The nib pressed them, but did not ink them. The clerk must have been testing phrases, deciding what could be born. Kept would have meant admission, not kept would have meant rupture. Still recorded was the compromise, the truth disguised as procedure. He inked none of them, but the paper carried all 3. Pressure is more faithful than pen. The triplet acts like a whispered vote. The fiber keeps all outcomes, none chosen, all implied. It says the society was kept, not kept, and still recorded at once. It refuses binary. It insists on residue. The ledger lived in a cabinet at the back of the hall. When archivists lifted it decades later, they found words not in paper, but in wood. On the underside of the drawer, scratched shallow by a blade tip, a sentence waited, "Schließ die Akte nicht." Do not close the file. The hand is uneven, the strokes halting. Whoever carved it was not practicing ornament. He was confessing in secrecy. The words are not large enough to be decoration. They are precisely large enough to be remembered by the wood itself. Furniture resists forgetting more stubbornly than pages. Wood carries oils from hands, grooves from wrists, incisions from tools. The drawer repeated the warning every time it was opened, to anyone willing to look beneath. Do not close, do not finish, do not pretend the ash has been consumed and accounted. Keep it open because it never ended. In the Atlas of Berlin societies, bound in heavy boards, the entry for the Table Society is spread across 2 pages. Once folded to fit a smaller cabinet, the crease runs diagonally across the line of names. Every attempt to flatten it has failed. Under glass, the fold relaxes for a day, then reasserts itself by morning. Weighted under iron, it holds briefly, then rises again. The fold always returns to the same junction, where one member's name reappears twice under different initials. The crease touches both, as if reminding the archivist these were not separate. Men, these were one presence doubled by record-keeping. The parish refused to reconcile the duplication. The fold reconciles it in its own way, by insisting on the bend. Residue 3 is persistence, paper that bends once and never forgets, that reenacts the loop each time it is disturbed. The parish may say do not draw the lines. The fold says the line will draw itself again and again. Together the 3 residues form a new refrain, still recorded, do not close, return. The words are not in the same language, not in the same medium. One is pressed into pulp, one carved into wood, one folded into fiber, but they harmonize. They say what none of the stamped slips or bureaucratic neologisms dared to say. They say the society persists in trace, in refusal, in repetition. The clerk who tested phrases, the hand that carved wood, the fold that insists on its angle, all become witnesses against the machine that sought to disguise them. The city could call the society a reading club. It could stamp processing forever, but the materials themselves dissent. They mutter their truth in dents and creases. Residue is the archive's rebellion. We let the file drift into dream because closure demands parable. We see the society, seated at its pine table, bowls before them. The ledger lies open at one end, ink steady, menu ordinary. The bowls hold nothing but residue. The men raise them to their lips anyway, swallow anyway, cough anyway. Their silence is not emptiness, but ritual. Were they erased by the city or invented by the file? Did men actually eat ash, or did the ledger decide they had and carry that memory into its own body? Were they a brotherhood of refusal, or a paper fiction born of stamps and refrains? The dream will not choose. In one version, they are real, silent, present, kept in every register. In another, they exist only in pressure marks and creases, shadows invented by a bureaucracy that needed them to fill its lullabies. Either way, the file has the last word. A file draws a society. The society cannot redraw the file. The refrains mutate one final time. Still processing becomes still recorded. Not assigned becomes do not close. Not aligned becomes return. These are not evasions. They are admissions. They acknowledge that the case cannot be finished because residue is endless. We place the ledger back in its drawer. We do not shut it flush. We leave a breath's width open because the wood has already told us, do not. Close. We rest our wrist in the groove one last time, acknowledging the press of others before us. We watch the fold rise again, the diagonal shadow reasserting itself across names the parish tried to disguise. This is not a ghost story. This is a system that forgot how to forget, a city that preferred silence to scandal, a ledger that pretended to list meals but carried only crystals of ash, a drawer that warned not to shut, a fold that insisted on its own return. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is. Because across clocks, across languages, across countries, we are all opening the same drawer, touching the same dent, watching the same fold reappear. And residue speaks the same refrain in every ear, don't close the file.